Welcome to Story Chat Radio. We are book editors Carly Hayward and Jenny Chappell. Every month we watch a different movie with an eye for storytelling and novel writing.
We use our years of training and experience editing novels to break down each movie's storytelling elements to help you improve your novel in progress.
Warning, Jenny ruins everything.
Hey, you ruin things too.
So don't be surprised if there are spoilers.
On this episode, we are discussing the sci-fi horror Alien, and then we'll end with a critique of one lucky author's query. Just as a reminder, you can now support the podcast on Patreon, where you can read the queries we critique, plus get lots of other bonus content. It's easy to find. Just find us at patreon.com/storychatradio.
All right, here come the spoilers. A commercial spaceship is returning to Earth with a 7-member crew in stasis. And of course, the one member who maybe wasn't in stasis, Jones the cat. Detecting a transmission from a nearby moon, the ship's computer, Mother, wakes the crew. Per company policy requiring any potential distress signal be investigated, they land on the moon, sustaining damage from its atmosphere and rocky landscape in the process. The captain, Dallas, and 2 other crew members, Kane and Lambert, leave the ship to investigate. The remainder of the crew, Ripley, who's our main character, Ash, Brett, and Parker stay behind to make repairs. Ripley deciphers part of the transmission, determining it to be a warning, but cannot relay this information to those on the derelict ship because they lost communication. The crew who left discovered the signal originates from an abandoned alien ship and enter it. On the alien ship, Kane discovers a chamber containing hundreds of eggs, and when he touches one, a creature springs out, breaking through his helmet. It attaches itself to his face, and Dallas and Lambert carry the unconscious Kane back to their ship. Ash, the science officer, attempts to remove the creature from Kane's face, but stops when he discovers that its blood is an extremely corrosive acid. It later detaches of its own accord and is found dead, and Kane wakes up and seems to be just fine. The ship is partially repaired, and the crew continue their journey back to Earth. During a final crew meal before returning to stasis, Kane suddenly chokes and convulses, and a small alien creature bursts from his chest, killing him, and it escapes into the ship. The crew attempts to locate the creature with tracking devices and captures it with nets, electric prods, etc. The alien kills the crew one by one. They discuss what to do, but they can't really leave because their one shuttle isn't big enough for all of them. So they try to flush out the alien and kill it. Ripley discovers Ash has been secretly ordered by the company to bring the alien back, with the crew considered expendable. She confronts him and he tries to kill her. Eventually, the others intervene and discover that Ash is an android. The remaining crew decide to self-destruct the ship and take their chances in the shuttle. However, Parker and Lambert are ambushed and killed by the creature while gathering life support supplies. Ripley initiates the self-destruct sequence, gets Jones the cat, the most important character, and barely escapes as the ship explodes. We think everything is safe, but an intense reversal as Ripley prepares for stasis, she discovers the alien is aboard the shuttle. She flushes it out, opens an airlock, shoots it with a grappling hook, and finally fires the engine, blasting the alien into space. After recording the final log entry, she places the cat and herself into stasis for the trip back to Earth. Jenny, what did you think about this movie?
So first of all, that final scene that you're talking about where she finally kills the alien or whatever is it takes the meaning of double tap so much further. It's quadruple tap at that point.
You got a double tap though.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen this movie all the way through before. I've seen it in bits and pieces, but I don't think I've ever actually just sat down and watched it. And I've always struggled. I've been thinking since I watched it. I've been thinking about why haven't I ever watched it? It's one of my husband's favorite movies. Science fiction and horror is totally his jam. So I've always struggled with techie science fiction, and I think I had a hard time getting into the beginning of this movie because there's some necessary setup that feels a little jargon heavy to me. But honestly, that wasn't as bad as I remember it being. So I'm not sure what made that difference for me, whether it's like a change in me or that watching to analyze is always a little bit different than just watching for enjoyment. So yeah, overall, I was really impressed. I have seen things through the years about Ripley being like, a total badass and just in terms of like being like a really important character for women and representation on movies and especially big budget films. So getting to see all of that in action, like there wasn't any like screaming and falling down, and she didn't wear high heels the whole time. And um, I know. So anyway, so I was really happy to see all of that. And I think not just the writing and the acting, which were fabulous, but just like how well the whole thing holds up since it's like 40 something years old at this point.
Seriously.
So like the crew is diverse, especially for the 1970s, including one of the first trans characters to be seen in a big budget film, which is really cool. The effects hold up really well for the most part. I mean, there's like the thing about, the room in the ship that has like 1,000 little lights all in it, which feels very like 1960s sci-fi, but at the same time, it still has that vibe to it of it still being science fiction. So yeah, and so I think part of what makes the effects hold up is that they use them sparsely.
Yep.
They keep a lot of it in the dark or just short flashes of light. I think I was most surprised because I always thought of this movie as, and based on my limited viewing of it, as being slow and kind of boring, but it really isn't. Like the pacing of it is actually pretty good. And so, I have to talk about the side character I was obsessed with, who
Yes.
you already mentioned. Any guesses who it is?
I'm pretty sure I know.
It is definitely Jones the cat.
Definitely. Of course. Because he's the best.
Of course he is. So my office cat, Phil, says, which Phil, Carly.
Love Phil.
And
Love
anybody who follows me on social media has probably seen pictures of him. Phil says Jones is one of the most realistic performances he's ever seen. Like how Jones just watches the alien kill that one dude. Doesn't even blink, and then he runs away from Ripley when she's trying to save him. Even hisses at her as she's putting him into the stasis pod. So Phil
good.
says it's just chef kiss.
Man.
He's happy to see us finally taking feline performances into consideration, giving them their due, and demands we only watch movies starring cats of Jonesy's gravitas from now on.
I think Phil is the reviewer that we all need in our lives. And maybe
one we deserve.
Yeah. Maybe we should start like a Phil segment with just like his opinions on the movie every month.
If we ask for his opinions, then he won't be interested anymore.
Well, we don't tell him we're starting the Phil segment. We just start
okay.
one.
I'm not sure if we can actually outthink Phil.
That's fair. He is too
So
smart
what did you
for
think
us.
of the movie, Carly?
Yeah. So Jones was also my favorite character. Not shocking. I have seen this movie before. But it's been a while, and I was pretty sure he survived, but I was very tense the entire movie trying to remember if he survived. So the first time I saw it was actually for a film class in college, so I've only ever watched it with that kind of like analysis eye, which is interesting. But it really doesn't disappoint. I do think it's a little slow in the beginning, but I like that it's intentional, and it feels like it's doing it so that you really feel like you're just part of the crew. So like when they're having that meal all together before the alien bursts out of the stomach, it's actually really realistic. Like we're not zoomed out or like focused on one person. We're not hearing one conversation at a time. It really feels like that kind of family dinner with all the chaos that kind of includes.
Yeah.
And it's just so real that like when you do get to that big moment, it's like, oh, okay, here we go. This is scary now. And I just think it holds up really well. Like you said, the effects are still good. The acting's great. And it is a diverse cast. That thing you were mentioning with Ripley being like this amazing female character. especially for the times, and how she's like really pointed to as like the paragon of female leads in sci-fi movies. I read somewhere that it's because she was originally written as a male character. And the only thing they changed was her gender. They didn't change anything else. So like
That
she
makes
comes
sense.
yeah, she comes across as this amazing character because she wasn't written as female, and usually when they do that, especially back then, that comes with the high heels and
The
the
falling
boob
down.
and the falling down and all that stuff. And I think it really shows, and I think it was
Yeah.
really well done. I did not know about the trans character. I love that. That's
Yeah,
really
I only know
cool.
that because again, my husband, the film geek, said in the second movie there's like a shot where you get to see like documentation about all of the characters,
And
and
it
it
mentioned
mentions
that
that
is
in
so
there
cool. I
about
love
Lambert.
that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not even like just like an interpretation. It's actually
No,
canon
it's
that
canon.
this
That's
character
really
is
cool.
trans.
I love that. Anyway, so Jenny, what does this movie do well that writers can use in their own work?
Yeah, so I think, again, there's a lot of it that was really, really good. So much of it, I think, is specifically cinematic. But really, like, the movie is so tense. Like, it has such good tension in it. And I think that's partially why it feels a little slow at the beginning, is because it's got that build of
Yep.
tension. Part of it, too, is that it's a movie from the 1970s, and movies were just made differently then than they are now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I mentioned a minute ago, this movie was very tense. Despite being quieter in a lot of ways than what we're used to seeing in science fiction movies. Like, there aren't a lot of explosions or like mega fight scenes. There are explosions and there are fight scenes, but there aren't a lot of them.
Yep.
Like I said, the special effects are fairly limited. The tension in this movie comes from the characters themselves and the situations that they're in. Movies do have a lot of those sensory elements at their disposal that books don't. And those are definitely employed here to great effect. We've talked on the podcast before about music in a film and the difference it can make in how the viewer perceives it. This score does a fabulous job of adding to the tension. I noticed at the end when Ripley finally gets into the stasis pod, the music changes completely from the way it was the rest of the film. So I was still waiting for like another alien hand to pop up or something.
Totally.
But the music here was much lighter and more hopeful. Whereas the rest of the movie, it was, either like your classical kind of strings or like a dissonant kind of music that really added to the sense of tension. Lighting was another element. Like I said, this movie is very visually dark, and it definitely adds to that sense of not knowing what's out there. But I really think it's the story and the characters that create that tension in the film. Before I get into that a whole lot, though, I think it might make sense to talk more about what makes for good tension in a story.
Yeah. Okay. So, what makes for good tension? There's quite a few things we can look at with tension. It's sort of a broad topic, but the main ones are playing with reader expectations, inciting event shifts, stakes, withholding information, plot twists, tropes, cliffhangers, and most importantly, conflict. So let's start with the inciting event. The inciting event obviously is what kind of gets your story moving. It throws your character into the plot. So when the inciting event changes everything, you start to build that tension because the plot is beginning. This is where the tension kind of comes in. Your characters are thrown off balance, and again, that builds the tension for your readers because something's happening. The plot is coming. Here it comes. It all begins. This brings us to basically your two main sources of tension, and that's conflict and stakes. There's a reason we focus on these items in queries, because they cause the most tension for readers. And tension is what kind of keeps people reading. It's what hooks people in and keeps them not putting the book down. That's not a good sentence. You know what I'm trying to say. And conflict is the basis of all your plots. It's kind of just everything. Your character enters a cycle of conflict and reactions and consequences. I'll get into that more later because I can talk about that for a very long time. But these two elements drive the tension that you create in readers. But then you also want to play with your readers' expectations. And that's kind of what includes tropes and plot twists and cliffhangers and withheld information. That's all playing with expectations. And you can utilize all of these basically to build tension. So when a reader expects one thing and has it upended, it creates tension because you've gotten rid of that safety net of their expectations, basically.
That feeling of like, oh, I know what's going to happen next.
Exactly. Once you kind of like, it's pulling the rug out from under your reader in a good way.
Yeah.
So like heading the plot in unexpected directions, leaving the reader with that dangling unknown, aka your cliffhanger, upending a trope, keeping information, all lead to that kind of tension. So you can create a ton of tension by utilizing basically the unknown. Information should be revealed to readers when it's like most pivotal and impactful. So if we think of the reveal of Ash the android, had it been revealed earlier, it would have lost all the impact and tension. It would have been like, okay, is this normal? Oh, that's something new. Okay, well, that's fine, whatever. Like, that seems like a secret, but you lose all the stakes from it and all that tension. Right. So by revealing it at that crucial, like, life or death moment when he starts bleeding milk, you give it importance and tension. Ash changes from an annoying coworker to one with, like, cruel intent. And you ramp up that tension and recolor the rest of the story with this new information. So now we get to know why he let those other characters in off of the moon and out of quarantine when Ripley didn't want to. We kind of
and also like why he lets the little baby alien run away, and he's like, no, let it live. And you know,
exactly.
There was a scene I thought was, or part I thought was really funny when they find the like face thing dead. Mm-hmm. And he has like this like long stick thing that he's been using, and he just takes it and pokes it with it. And I was like, if that's not science in a nutshell,
right?
Like, I don't know what
with a stick. Yeah. So I think it's all.
Yeah, but it did. I think you're totally right that, you know, he had these weird little actions that we weren't 100% sure, like, why is he behaving that way? So yeah, I think it slowly builds this mystery that is then revealed. So exactly. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think tension is one of those things that really needs to be pervasive in writing. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is that you need tension on every level of a story. And it makes it really tricky when you're trying to figure out where the tension is off. So like there needs to be tension at the big picture level, at the scene level, on a sentence level. When we think of tension on a large scale, it's normally about the plot and the pacing. So are you putting your characters into situations where they have to struggle? And then are you giving the reader the right balance of pushing that struggle harder and letting it ease off some? That right balance will vary by story depending on a lot of factors, but it's always one of those like, I know it when I feel it kind of things. Something else to consider is tone. You can use tone to either heighten or diminish tension. Remember, the tone is how the narrator perceives what's happening, how they feel about it, and then how they interpret that for the reader. So then at a scene level, you have to like dig a little bit deeper than that. For a scene to have tension, there has to be conflict, but it also has to be about how the characters react to that conflict. In a movie, this is often visual. So like the actors have to convey a lot of emotion through visual means. So in writing, though, it means that the author has to simulate that nonverbal communication. So that's something to take into consideration. Mood comes into play a lot on a scene level. If you've created a
Yes.
very tense mood in a particular scene, that can be broken by having characters like goofing off or suddenly making out. I remember thinking that
Yeah.
about The Mummy 2, that the characters would just start like randomly kissing, and it really broke the tension for me. Like, hello, your kid is basically being stolen by these supernatural entities. Maybe like wait to snog until they're all safe. I don't know. But on a scene level, so tension is all about, or on a sentence level, I'm sorry. Tension is all about word choice, how you put sentences and words together. Remember that words have not only definitions, but connotations. So there's a slight difference in meaning when we use the word walk versus the word stroll. And these
Yes.
slight differences really build up. So we can use words intentionally to create subtext and micro conflict that's so subtle readers don't even realize that it's building. From there, keep in mind that shorter sentences and paragraphs keep the reader's eye moving faster and heighten the tension, and then longer ones slow the tension down some. So these are it's certainly not everything. It's a very quick overview. But when you know these things, you can use them intentionally to have that impact on the reader.
Yeah, I think honestly, one of my favorite tricks is sentence length and
Yeah.
like quick, fast, simple sentences versus the longer lyrical sentences and how that changes how your reader responds to it. I always find
Yeah.
really interesting and very powerful, honestly. Anyway, so I promised to go over tension and conflict. So, tension and conflict go hand in hand, especially if you're doing it right. Conflict will create tension for your reader. So, let's start by getting into the what and why of it. So, a successful plot is basically created through a cycle of conflict and response. So the conflict is the world acting on your character. Then you have your character reacting to the conflict. And then the consequences are the world reacting to your character's actions. And that's kind of the big cycle that creates your plot. And so the cycle continues around and around, the world and your character kind of responding to each other. And that conflict is what leads to tension, basically. So, how will the world respond to your character's actions? How will your character respond to the world? And then, if you add stakes on top of that, now something is at risk for your character, and that ramps up the tension. Excuse me. So, you need both for the plot to feel kind of genuine and compelling. Risking something basically always adds tension to your life in general. So think of it like gambling. The risk of losing the money and not knowing what the outcome will be creates tension.
Yeah.
Not that I'm condoning gambling, nor do I gamble. I'm a terrible gambler. I get too nervous. But you can't have tension without conflict because conflict is kind of the basis of all tension, and that's a little recursive and repetitive, but I think you all get what I mean. So tension forms from not knowing, from the potential for things to get worse, from anxiety. So you want your readers to be anxious for your characters and not being sure about how it's going to work out for them. So, like, even in a romance where you know there will be a happily ever after or an HEA, there's still tension in discovering how your characters will reach that HEA and what they'll have to give up to get there. So, you kind of can't separate tension and conflict because you can't have one without the other.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good point too about that just because you know or you think you know how something's going to end doesn't mean that you know how they get to that point. Like
Exactly.
what are the sacrifices they're going to have to make?
Yeah.
So it's not always just about like do they win or lose, but what is the partial win versus the partial loss?
Right.
I think that's a great point. So yeah, so in this movie we see so much of this at work. From the opening scene, there's this real felt sense of isolation as the camera pans across this giant empty ship. Then when the characters wake up, we see issues causing tension between them right away. Some of the characters have concerns about money because this is a corporate ship. This is their job. They don't know right away that the computer woke them up early or why. They also aren't really in control of the situation. So, like, they have to follow this company's policies as part of their job. So, in a lot of ways, these are very much like things we all experience on a pretty regular basis, but like in this pressure cooker kind of situation. So, basically, this movie is like The Office in space. Like, can you imagine being trapped in space with all your annoying coworkers and all the personality conflicts that come with that?
I'm
So,
now
like, there are
just
people.
I'm just picturing you and I and our cats in space and all the conflict we would have with that.
It would mostly be about how your cat won't let me pet her. That would
Yeah,
be mostly what it is.
Yeah, it's true. I'm sure Phil loves me. So yeah, be
Phil
my
loves
cat on one
everybody.
side. We'd have stacks of books and manuscripts, and we would just
Yeah.
bicker the whole time. It'd be great.
It's true.
I don't mind this.
So we had all these people making their decisions based on their own feelings, and then others trying to follow the rules. And it really just creates like a very yikes kind of situation. So consider in every situation, who has the power? How are they using that power? And how do the other characters feel about that? Then we have other kinds of everyday issues in this movie. Their technology fails them like many, many times. Every time Carly and I get together to do the podcast, we're like, how badly is Jenny's internet going to mess up this time? So real life conflict right there.
Yup.
I think an argument could be made that capitalism is the real enemy in this movie. Not only does the company consider the crew to be expendable, but they don't even have enough shuttles for all of them to escape the ship. 7 people and a cat. That's what we're talking about here. They didn't have enough lifeboats for that. Like, did they not learn anything from the Titanic?
Yup.
And then I think that that final battle scene is really the culmination of all of this. Like, we think Ripley is safe. She's gotten away from the main ship with Jones the cat in all of his glory. She's so sure she's going to be okay that she's preparing for stasis by undressing and only wearing her teeny tiny little space underwear.
Yeah, this is the one moment where I'm like, what would it have been if it was a male Ripley?
Yeah, same. So then this is the time when she is at literally her most vulnerable. She's alone. She's not even wearing like clothes that will protect her in any way. That we get that reversal, and like boom, she's suddenly face to face with this space monster in a very small, even more confined space. Like, even the cat can't help her at this point because she's already put him into the stasis pod.
Yeah.
So like I mentioned before, this was so tense for me that even after she ejected the alien into space, I was still waiting for another jump scare.
Totally. Like, where's the other baby or something? Like, did it leave another?
Yes.
Or did she just shoot a shell of it? Like,
or like, did it find some other way of coming back in? Or I don't know. I don't know what could have happened at that point.
Was Jones the villain the whole time? I don't know.
Oh, I am not going to tell Phil you said that.
It was just a question. I feel like Phil would appreciate the question, but whatever. Anyway, so yeah, I was the same way. I was terrified. Okay, so now we ask, how much tension does your story need? And tension should come in waves. You slowly build tension and then release it. It's kind of an up and down. You don't want to be on a constant build without ever relieving that pressure. So you constantly want to ride that up and down wave, and make sure you're releasing that tension. You want to reveal that information, give readers a resolution to a conflict, give your characters a moment to breathe before you start to build it up again. So kind of always think about tension on a wave. And then you want to consider kind of age category and genre. So each genre will have different types of tension, and that's always or almost always tied to the type of stakes you have. So in horror, like in this movie, the main tension comes from whether or not the characters will survive. So we have kind of like survival tension, quote unquote, which I'm not sure is a thing, but I'm dubbing it a thing if it's not a thing.
We're making it a thing.
We're making it a thing. Obviously, the most important character, Jones, had to survive. But in a fantasy, it's usually more like the world is what is at stake. And that leads us to that type of tension where it's like, what is going to happen to the world? And in a romance, it's the will they or won't they, or the how will they tension that can feed into that sexual and romantic tension. The relationship is at stake, their happiness is at stake, and that leads to all sorts of fun romantic tension. And then this comes into play with age category as well. So, because different ages have kind of a different emphasis on stakes. So like YA books tend to have freedom or independence at stake, which leads to the tension that's around that. Whereas middle grade tends to have more of like family at stake, which of course leads to like familial, or I'll call it like light survival tension, because your characters are going to survive and their family probably will, but like in what form? So when you're writing, you kind of want to figure out the main stake of the story, and then you can use that to figure out your type of tension and the ways in which you can kind of play with it and its ebb and flow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I've never thought of survival tension before, so yeah,
We've
coined a new phrase here.
Yeah, I love it. Here we go.
So if your tension is off, there are some common places to look first. In my experience, it's a lot more common to not have enough tension than it is to have too much.
Yes.
Although we have sort of alluded to with this, too much tension can be a thing as well. This is what happens when there isn't enough space between intense scenes. So the reader almost starts to go numb to that heightened emotional state. So we need time to process in between. But in terms of needing more tension, which like I said is what most stories need, the biggest place to start is making sure each scene is pushing the main plot forward. This is ultimately where flashbacks, dream sequences, campfire scenes, and the like really create problems in stories, is that they aren't pushing that main plot forward. So it slows everything down too much and doesn't feel relevant. When backstory and exposition are woven in with the action of the main plot, and then we put subplot and character development in too, it all becomes seamless, so it's all sort of happening together. And so we don't get that feeling of like those big chunks that are slowing down too much. The other place that tension often feels off is the balance of action and reaction. We tend to remember that we need to see the characters reacting to big things, but it's easy to forget they also need to react to small things. Those smaller, less intense reactions are a great place to develop the character and get tension into every scene. So again, every element of a story really impacts tension. So consider for each scene and for the story as a whole, how you're using each element to create that impact you want for your reader.
I think that's a really good point. I didn't really think about like the less intense reaction still needing to be there. That's a great point.
Yeah. And it helps us, I think, kind of more carefully control that ebb and flow of tension that you were talking about. And there's really shouldn't be, in a good story, any such thing as a scene with zero tension. It might be different kinds of tension. But, you know, and we might shift between internal and external and those kinds of things, but there should always be tension.
Correct.
So that brings us to our query for this month, which is a young adult contemporary. Carly, what are your thoughts on this query?
So I think this is the first time, maybe, where the query hasn't perfectly matched up with the movie we chose by some random coincidence. It's just kind of funny.
Because we commented on it. Like, we recognized the pattern, so the universe is like, nope.
I feel like we recognized the pattern, like, for months. and it's only now that the universe is mad at us. I don't know. Anyway, I was really invested in this query at the start, but then it kind of fizzled for me. We kind of begin to focus on what the story's gonna, almost like what it's gonna teach readers or teach the character instead of focusing on the story itself. It got a little, not exactly preachy, that's not the right word, but a little like, this is what the character's gonna learn about. And you kind of want to show that and not tell us that. So, however, it is sort of fittingly for this month. I think we lose sight of the tension that kind of comes with the conflicts and the stakes in this query. So we learn kind of the why of the conflict and like the big start of it, but not why it continues or what the character's kind of at risk of losing besides something that the character should be rid of to begin with. Like the big stakes is losing out on something that's bad for them, sort of. So I want more focus on who the character is and why the stakes are important to them. Why is it at risk to follow through with that conflict? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I thought it starts pretty strong, but then it loses me toward the end. Specifically, it's the last sentence of the third paragraph that has this distinct tonal shift for me that carries into the next paragraph. So I wanted to see you dig a little deeper, and it feels like you pull back instead. So for that final paragraph of the summary, don't shy away from going into the conflict more and how the stakes are raised. Remember, that's really what's going to hook someone, is exposing the protagonist's vulnerability and telling us not only what happens, but why we should care. Yes. The other thing I noticed is that there are some names in here that kind of give us like a level of detail we don't really need to see in a query. So, for example, you give us the name of the diner that the main character works at. That doesn't come up again in the query, so we don't really need to know that.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced we really need to know the aunt's full name. I think maybe just calling her aunt might be enough. And then there was something else in there as well. Oh, I think that's kind of what I was feeling from like, so the thing you were saying, Carly, about it being like these specific things that the character learns about. I feel like it might be better there to go with something. Well, first of all, we need to see what are the obstacles she's overcoming, not what is she learning about, not what is she gaining, but what is she potentially losing. But then also, it just felt like a little bit too much of the wrong kind of information. So I think that, just really look and see what, I think always be asking yourself with a query letter, what does the reader need to know in order to understand the main character, the main conflict, and the stakes? And then you can kind of make the decisions based on that.
Right. I think with the diner and naming it, at least, especially in a query, it's more important almost, and I'm not saying you should describe the diner in detail, but it's more important to give us like a descriptor of the diner that kind of sets like your tone and your mood than it is to name the diner. So like you're kind of losing out on that word count by giving us those names. It's more important to set the tone of the story.
Right.
If that makes sense.
That's a good point.
All right. Anyway, so next month we'll be watching the Marvel movie Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. We'll also have another query or blurb critique, so if you want your query featured on the podcast, you can find the details about how to do that on our website or Twitter page.
You can find our podcast on our website, storychatradio.com, or you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or many other streaming services. While you're there, please leave us a rating. You can support the show and get extra content at patreon.com/storychatradio. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at storychatradio.
Thanks for joining in our nonsense.